Hey, this is the Entertainment Advice Channel. What I want to talk about today is the topic of why entertainment is not subjective. So, for this video, I'm going to explain in a simple and straightforward way why entertainment is not subjective, so anyone can understand it, even those unfamiliar with this topic. So, now that I mention that, let's get started. So, when it comes to the topic of why entertainment is not subjective, it simply comes down to the fact that there's fundamental rules that determine if entertainment is going to be enjoyable or not, okay? Because the truth of the matter is, whether it's TV shows, movies, music, the truth of the matter is, obviously, your main priority when you are a company is to make sure that you obviously, of course, produce something that the majority of people like, okay? The majority of people, for that matter, not just maybe in North America, but throughout the world, for that matter, like, okay? There is fundamental rules that determine if something is well written or not, okay? And that's the truth of the matter. So if you have a system like that, you know, truth be told, it becomes a case of it's not subjective and it becomes a case of it is objective because there's certain fundamental rules that you have to take into consideration that determine if your fundamental formula for writing stories, when it comes to coming up with ideas for stories. Let's just use maybe movies as an example for this video, even though this can cover a wide variety of topics, when it comes to entertainment like music, and other things as well, even video games. But yeah, like I said before, let's just use movies for example. Okay, when it comes to movies, for crying out loud, the truth of the matter is, you obviously need to have, you know, a fundamental formula for figuring out like what are movie plots people are interested in. Okay, like for example, there's a difference between saying, okay, I'm gonna make a movie talking about, like, for example, maybe aliens are gonna invade the world, versus maybe a topic that relates to something like, okay, this is the story of somebody who, maybe just, let's just say, for example, who lives his life as somebody who sells antique items for a living. Like, what do you think, obviously, using common sense, do you think people would be more interested in? Obviously, the first option, okay? So my point is that there's a fundamental principle, to come up with stories, not just plots alone, but even how it's written, how it's directed, like how they direct, like, obviously, like the camera scenes and stuff, like when they're depicting a situation, like, in other words, a setting they're trying to create, stuff like that, for example, and even just how well the action is done. There's obviously something known as a fundamental principle, okay? Now, even though, of course, as human beings, we all have different preferences, some people might say, I like this movie more than this other movie, and that same person says, I like this movie more than this other movie, vice versa. We all have different preferences, and that is true, okay? That is true. People do have different preferences. I know that. I'm aware of that. I think everyone's aware of that, for that matter, at least for the most part. But the truth of the matter is, um, even though we have different preferences, there's a difference between preference, like, okay, we have different preferences versus having a fundamental idea of how it is done, a fundamental system of how it's done. And that's what I'm referring to. Okay, a fundamental system of like how it's done. Like, for example, what type of topics are going to be covered, for the plot. Okay, how exactly the plots are written, how the action scenes look. Like, those are fundamental principles, okay, which of course cover a wide variety. Which, of course, if you're a movie company, more like, you know, if you can come up with those fundamental principles, you will realize, okay, these fundamental principles work, you know, quite well when it comes to making the majority of people like a movie, for crying out loud. Okay, these are fundamental principles, and maybe, who knows, they found out the fundamental principles that work for how to, like, come up with interesting plots, how to come up with interesting dialogue, how to come up with interesting, settings and stuff like that through testing out many different types, of course, of ways of doing it through obviously using people to test it on. So obviously, as a result of that, they figure out certain types of ways work better than others. Then the truth of the matter is, then it becomes a case of it is objective. It's not subjective. There are fundamental rules that work better than other particular rules or something, okay? And that's the truth of the matter I'm trying to get across here, okay? Yes, people do have different preferences, okay? But there's a difference between a preference, for example, like, okay, easily, an easy example I could say is like I was giving before, something similar to the point I was giving before. Like, okay, this person likes movie A versus movie B, you know, um, there's a difference between that versus realizing there's a fundamental system of how to make a movie. Like, for example, if I'm going to have a movie, wouldn't it make more sense to, like, for example, maybe, have a movie that has a certain amount of action scenes, for example, you know, versus a movie that doesn't have very much action scenes at all, for that matter? Or would it make more sense that if I like have maybe a movie, you know, for example, there's a certain character that is used that looks a certain type of way, versus how another way that character could look that maybe most people would not approve of. Like, there is fundamental principles to determine if something's well done or not. Okay, it's just like saying, like, do I want the main character for a movie to look like really cool and flashy with very cool looking gear, or do I just want him to look like an everyday person? You know, you know, for crying out loud. Okay, obviously, the fundamental principles were determined. If for movies in general, you want the character to look as flashy as this, and that's what I'm referring to. There's fundamental rules that determine how a movie is done. Okay, and that's the truth of the matter. Because the truth is, when it comes to this whole thing about subjectiveness, I think it's dangerous in entertainment regards, at least, this idea that everything is subjective, because someone might just put the crappiest effort into something when it comes to entertainment. Just look at maybe, like, for example, just using music as an example, you know this time, okay, let's just say somebody might use music and come up with the worst lyrics and not even think it out, just like Rebecca Black's Friday, perfect example, you know, and say, okay, this is a good song, versus comparing it to somebody who's actually a talented musician who made like a really, 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 really good song. Like, for example, maybe it could be someone like Mos Def, Eminem, Tupac, you know, um, you know, Um, another example, obviously off the top of my head, could obviously be Michael Jackson, all those people. It's like saying, when you say things are subjective, it's like saying Rebecca Black's song is just equal to those people who actually worked their ass off to make the best quality music that they could make, which makes no sense, okay? At all, for that matter, okay? Because the truth is, if you personally prefer Rebecca Black's song, then those people's songs, those legend songs, okay, well, that's your personal preference. But logically, those other people's songs are better written, like Tupac, Eminem, you know, um, you know, um, another person I can bring up easily is Jay Z, Michael Jackson, and all those type of people. Like, it's common sense, okay, that there's a difference between the quality level between Rebecca Black versus the music made by actual legends. So that's exactly what I'm trying to get across here. So there is a fundamental formula to determine if something is good or not when you're producing something for the majority of people. So to say everything is subjective, makes absolutely no sense. There is fundamental rules that come into place. So in short, yes, entertainment is objective, and it's not just um, something that just, like, as I was indicating before, relates to just movies. It also relates to music and every form of entertainment. So in short, every entertainment is objective. Okay, we do have different preferences, but when it comes to the fundamental rules of how it's set up, yes, there is definitive rules that determine if something is good or not. Okay, and that's the truth of the matter. Okay, for that matter. Okay, because if we want entertainment to become good again, since everyone's complaining entertainment's not as good as it used to be, we have to first break that myth. Because the truth of the matter is that is a myth that's been put out there. Personally, I can't really blame people because there was a lot of movie, music, TV show snobs out there that kind of give the idea of objectiveness a bad name. But in short, we have to train people to realize this, that you cannot associate the truth with those type of people, and that is the truth of the matter. So anyway, this is my video, and this is all I have to say, and simply put it on my mouth. So